We encounter parables in earliest Christian sources only in the Gospels, where they are told by Jesus. Most scholars believe these parables represent an authentic tradition going back to Jesus himself. It may not be a coincidence that Jesus' followers further on would not express themselves in parables. This is so because parables are used when the picture of the end is not completely clear yet. This is what makes Jesus express himself in that elusive way. Whereas the tradition at slightly later stages is already distinguished by insisting on a well-defined picture of the end. The Messiah, who was crucified, was risen from the dead, ascended to heaven, and will be back to restore all as the heavenly Son of Man. Parables also provide us with an important indication concerning the original language of Jesus' preaching. As observed by the late Shmuel Safrai, a distinguished Jerusalem scholar of rabbinic literature, even in much later rabbinic sources, most importantly in the Babylonian Talmud, where Aramaic is already predominant, parables are always recorded in Hebrew. In other words, this genre of teaching was traditionally conducted in Hebrew. It must have therefore been so much so in the first century land of Israel. Keeping in mind various concepts of the kingdom of God discussed earlier, let us look at some parables in the Gospels, where the motif of the kingdom is prominent. We focus on parables in Luke, though we could go for other synoptic variants with roughly same results. An interesting difference is Matthew's preference for using the appellation kingdom of heaven instead of kingdom of God. The preference that is noted was characteristic of rabbinic traditions too. Our aim is to understand with what kind of the notion of the kingdom Jesus identifies. Here are two consecutive parallels in Luke chapter 13. I read from starting from verse 18. He, Jesus, said therefore, "What is the kingdom of God like? And to what shall I compare it? It is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his garden. And it grew and became a tree, and the birds of the air made nests in its branches." And again he said, "To what shall I compare the kingdom of God? It is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour, till it was all leavened." Both these parables seem to indicate a collation of the modest beginnings, corresponding as it seems to the individual entrances into the kingdom, leading eventually, possibly in a distant future, to the end game of the general eschatological kingdom.